A very good morning to all of you. Rather drizzly morning. It almost feels like we are at JLF London. But we have a wonderful subject. The title comes from Ajay Bisaria's new book on India-Pakistan relations. We love to talk about the book, but we'd also like to talk about the concept of anger management in diplomacy. It is an angry world. If you look at the newspapers anyway today, there are conflicts which are almost taken for granted today. Conflict in the Middle East, conflict in Ukraine. There are humanitarian crises in the Congo, in Sudan, in Myanmar, and other places. Even the climate seems to be angry. And there are huge problems. People are angry. There are migrations. There are refugee problems. And there are huge number of protests going around the world. And to counter that, we have diplomacy. Diplomacy, if diplomacy exists, it is to prevent war, it is to encourage peace. And to discuss all this, I have not one, not two, but three full-fledged ambassadors. Yeah. So I'm going to, and there's something very unique. On this stage, we actually have two ambassadors who've been, let's put it bluntly, they've been expelled from the countries they went to. Starting with Ajay Bisaria, you were expelled, although you didn't call it that in your book. You say that relations were downgraded. But you actually sort of left in a secret BMW off on a flight to Dubai and didn't even come back to India. So what was the anger which resulted in this expulsion from Pakistan?
Thanks, Navtej. Yes, I was a sort of the focus of Pakistan's anger about Article 370. And, in my book, I do mention that while the diplomatic euphemism was that the diplomatic relationship was being downgraded, the reality was that I was expelled, and that's exactly what the media called it. So I was expelled. I was given 72 hours to leave. But, as they mentioned in Pakistan's parliament, it's nothing personal. This guy is a nice guy, but it's just that we don't like what his government has done. So that was the narrative. But, the larger point you make is that in diplomacy, often anger is deployed as a weapon to satisfy public opinion. So in a sense, something had to be done about what India had done, and Pakistan looked at various options. There were softer diplomatic options. There were harder military options, which Pakistan has deployed in the past. And clearly, it felt the military options were off the table. So the easiest picking was to
Was
just
the High
ask
Commissioner. Was the High Commissioner.
Exactly.
And was the High Commissioner angry? His posting was cut short. His prize posting to Pakistan.
Yes, I think I advocate that in my book, that we need not take these things personally, because diplomacy is best served cold. So we need to be patient. We need to be calm. And if there's a bit of advocacy in my book, it is that, the political and diplomatic engagement between countries should be about managing interests in the long term, and not be sort of confined to managing short-term
No,
passions.
but I love the anger part of it. So did we get angry in return? Did we do something?
No, so this was Pakistan's turn to be angry. So both being angry at the same time is always not good policy. That can lead to
It's
more...
almost like a married couple.
Exactly. So I think in diplomatic relationships, you do exactly that. What you do in your personal relationships is that you ensure that only one of the parties is angry at one time, because both being angry at the same time normally would lead to war. So it was India's turn to be angry earlier in the year, after Pulwama. Because every incident of terrorism that comes from Pakistan does have huge degree of public reaction, public anger. and India reacted in different ways. But at that point, not expelling the Pakistan High Commissioner, simply calling in the Indian High Commissioner for consultations. But this time, Pakistan expressed itself by expelling the Indian diplomat. So that was a higher level of anger.
So you have grades of anger. There's
Absolutely.
annoyance, there's anger, there's tantrum, and all these things. Nobody would believe it when you talk of diplomacy, but these things happen. As Diana is going to tell us, were the Chinese very angry with you personally? Or?
Thanks, Navtej. Good morning to everyone. Well, yes, when I opened the book and I read the first chapter, I said, oh my God, Ajay, you have described, you captured very, very precise picture of what it feels when you are informed that you are being expelled. In my case, it was very similar. It was downgrading of relationships. Relations, but I mean, reality was that I had to leave, and the logistical problem was that it was the middle of COVID, and the Chinese government chose a date to announce that on the day I landed from Europe in Beijing airport. So those days it was very, very difficult to go to China. I had to do several rounds of tests, certifications, and all that. So I have just done, it was like a trip to the moon. And I had just done that, and they are announcing it, I'm landing, and the first, news I'm getting still in the, queuing for the passport control is that I'm being expelled.
Just as you arrived?
Just as I arrived
nice.
With a child, And the thing is, I still had to do 3 weeks quarantine before I was physically able to leave. So I had this 3 weeks to ponder upon, and I guess this was probably the idea behind that, to let my government correct itself while I'm in captivity anyway.
And how was your government expected to correct itself?
Well, it's a very long story. I mean, okay.
Tell us the last bit of it.
Compared to India, Pakistan, it's a very short story, but it spans for about 2 years, where we had serious disagreements with the government of China. And I had only spent 1 year in Beijing, and I was very conscious that it was going to be a very rough posting. So I was okay. I mean, there was no anger at all. We have resisted several pushes from the Chinese government, and yes, we had our moment of anger 2 years before that, when there was this Chinese nationals, in fact, instigated a very ugly incident in my capital city, where they attacked the peaceful protesters, Lithuanian peaceful protesters, who were protesting for human rights in Tibet, Xinjiang, and so on. So the Chinese nationals attacked them and tried to silence them on their own soil, which terribly insulted the whole nation. And I have to say, we were angry. 2 years later, it was okay. The emotion that set in very soon when I had to leave was fear, because, we are very small. We are very small, a handful of people in Beijing, and bomb threats came to the embassy, local staff was harassed, and ultimately we had to evacuate everybody. So it was just not my departure. My departure was the most gentle compared to what happened later on, when we had to withdraw the staff in the middle of COVID, no flights, 3 days to give back apartments, close bank accounts, vaccinate pets, and all that. So it was fair and a lot of
uncertainty. And did you do the dramatic thing of destroying all your records, burning the papers?
Well, they had to do it. It's as per, protocol. So it was not for me, but I was coordinating it from Lithuania. I was already 2 months in Lithuania. So it was a lot of fear, uncertainty, and the good emotion, very apt description of emotion that Ajay mentions is that, the unfulfilled, the sense of unfulfilled duties, because
Absolutely.
You come sort of with your plans, while you are, of course, working for the country, and it's a country's priorities, but every ambassador has individual agenda within those priorities.
Yes.
So, and they are cut short. So, of course, no anger whatsoever, but some other emotions.
Yeah, Ajay uses a lovely phrase for that feeling in his book, which is like, I had the feeling that I had forgotten something, but I didn't know what. That's the kind of feeling you get.
Very correct.
And May-Elin, this must be sounding all so strange to you. Norway, and these people getting angry. Norway is a textbook example of a peace builder, who's actually in some ways weaponized its peace building as a tool of soft power. So does it all seem strange to you, or it's part of life?
Good morning, everyone. Yes, it does seem a bit strange to me. And you are saying rightly that Norway, we have been trying to be a peace builder and a peace facilitator. And I would argue, and also Ajay said so, when you are working on peace, there is no time for anger. Absolutely not. You need to be calm. You need to be composed. You need to have a long-term perspective. And you need to be really patient.
And yet you need to be working very hard.
And you know, some would say, I don't know if there are any Swedish here, but they would say this comes very naturally to Norwegians, being almost unemotional. But that is really what you have to do. Of course, you cannot be detached, but you really have to manage your anger. And there is no space for that anger.
You know, your comments reminds me of a description I was given by one of my ambassadors when I was very young. He said a diplomat has to be like a swan, calm on the surface and paddling furiously underneath. Is that right?
I can recognize that, in the different peace process that we have been involved as Norway, we are paddling furiously underneath the surface, but we do need to keep that calm. But of course, there is a lot of work to be done. You have to have both parties agreeing to the process. You have to have all parties involved. You have to have this long-term perspective, and all that requires very hard work.
But I mean, if I may carry on with what you said, I mean, I read somewhere that since 1993, Norway has been involved in at least 11 peace-building operations. And 1993 was the year of Oslo. Oslo has become emblematic with a peace process, and frankly, a peace process which failed. Any thoughts?
And it's this very, very sad period and moment for the Oslo Accords. I totally agree with that. And thinking about it, you can be angry. But I think also the Oslo Accords is a very good example of anger management. Also in the Oslo Accord, the ad hoc liaison committee was created, and this is a donors group to support the Palestinian state. And this has been a venue of where we can discuss with both parties, the Israeli and the Palestinians, for a period of 30 years. And most years, both have been there with the donors to discuss, and it has been a good period for managing. And I would also argue that in the very difficult situation we are in now, the chairing of this group and the donors group over 30 years, and that management has made it more possible and easier for Norway to keep cool in the situation that we are in now, to take decisions that are also looking at the needs of the Palestinian people, not only being angry at the terrorists that have been attacking.
Yes, because it has been a tremendous expression of anger that we have seen right there. So maybe Norway should get back there. But
if we are asked by both parties, we will.
Right.
I assure you.
Right. But there are some countries, for instance, our country, like India and Pakistan in this relationship, which doesn't like outsiders coming and meddling. Sorry for using that word, but we think we know how to do it. Ajay, any thoughts? Is our anger management different with Pakistan? Does it get a different dimension because of our partition roots?
Absolutely. I think we've been informed by our experience. So we say we want to be angry at each other. We don't want anyone else to intervene and either aggravate or reduce our anger. And I think that draws from the whole conversation and the early history about Kashmir and the various attempts at mediation starting right from the 50s and 60s, which India felt were not correct and which had agendas and so on. So I think the principle of bilateralism is pretty much established, but we haven't found ways of managing that bilateralism or managing that anger. And you were mentioning last that the anger is also graded. There are different levels of anger, and the hope is over a period of time you reduce it. Because there was a British commentary about anger, which said, the British start by being a little cross, and then more cross, and then a little annoyed and more annoyed, and then eventually a bit of a bother. It's always about the weather. And to lead that around escalating steps to war is maybe a 45-rung ladder. And hopefully what diplomacy does is keeps you at the lower rungs of that ladder.
So which is the worst moment in India-Pakistan history in expression of anger? I mean, after the Mumbai attacks, we did not react in an angry fashion. And this has been recently written about by Tom Friedman, comparing it to the Israeli reaction on Gaza. Which is the worst moment that you recall since you've closely studied India-Pakistan relations?
Well, all the wars were painful moments. For Pakistan, perhaps the most painful they consider was 1971, when their country was broken up into two. And that again was a result of perhaps not managing the anger and the relationship between the West and East Pakistan, which, if you recall, there was Yahya Khan, and he was known to have many angry, whiskey-fueled outbursts. He had famously called Mrs. Indira Gandhi that woman. And he had...
Well, Nixon called her worse.
Yes, absolutely. So she was used to being called names, and of course she reacted, I think, quite dispassionately. And while we are at it, Mrs. Gandhi's strategic guru was P.N. Huxer. And his counsel to her just before the war was that statesmanship has two attributes. One is the effective expression of anger, and the second is if its effective management, once that anger has been expressed. The problem is that it's politically and for policymakers more seductive to do the former and not the latter. So you let that anger out, and then it runs away and you don't know how to manage it.
How to manage it. And is that what happening in your region, Diana? A full expression of anger, I mean, Russian anger and NATO anger. You're building a fence with Belarus. Is there any attempt to manage that anger, or you want to let it flow?
It's a question that is very difficult to say yes and no, because anger can be justified, unjustified. Even in the subjective terms, you would say that for Ukrainians who only want to remain on the map, it's the anger which is justified. While for Russians who just wanted to grab another land, I mean, I don't think it is. In our case, coming back to our China story, we have also felt that China was unjustifiably angry with us for just, doing what others have done, for example, in economic relations with Taiwan, where, they told us clearly that it's a different China now, so you can't do what the others have done 10 or 20 years ago, because we would no longer tolerate that. But, the anger was really spread, and, in a population on 1.4 billion, we were surprised how easily can the Communist Party, spread the anger to the population, because there was this postman in Shanghai who refused to send a parcel to Lithuania. He said there was a country that did not exist anymore. They abolished our embassy. He said the embassy does not exist anymore. So, it's very easy, and everybody in the neighborhood knew that suddenly this tiny Lithuania, thousands of miles away, became the enemy of the Chinese people. So we felt, and we still feel we haven't done anything, so we are not really angry, but we are surprised at the levels and ways of expressing that anger. So I guess to generalize, it can be, justified anger and a good, in a way, the anger that needs to be ventilated and expressed, because otherwise, how do you make your point?
That's right. I want to now just turn for a couple of rounds on creative management of this anger. And May-Elin, may I start with you in terms of Norway's experience? You do a lot of humanitarian assistance work, and you personally have done a lot of that over the years. Does that create a vested interest? Does economic relations create a vested interest which sort of blunts the anger, for instance? Does associations with civil society, which you do a lot of, is that a possible tactic?
Yes, indeed. And let me just say first, you were mentioning all those processes that we have been involved in as Norway. And in all of them, we have been asked by both parties to be a facilitator. And being a facilitator is what we are. We are not a mediator.
Not a mediator. Very important.
And that is also, of course, why we have not been involved in the India-Pakistan conflict, because that has not been wanted or maybe not needed. And that is one of the core principles that we will have if we go into a process and facilitate. And one of the other principles is that also we want to have a people-centered approach, and we want to have an inclusive approach. It's not possible to get peace if you don't involve all parties. It's not possible to get peace if people are not fed, if people don't get their basic humanitarian needs. So that is also why, we are building around a peace process, if we are involved in one, also with a lot of humanitarian support. And on the inclusivity, and you were mentioning NGOs and civil society, that is very important to have all parties on board. And what we have also been finding over the years is that it's extremely important to have the women on board. In all processes, if you exclude the women on the table, you exclude half of the population.
There's a very famous UN resolution for that, isn't there?
It's the Security Council Resolution 1325. It's been a very effective work of the Security Council, and Norway was one of the first countries to have an activity plan according to that resolution, but many countries have now. And it has been also established more and more that if you are going to come out of war, those who have been affected by war, the victims, the participants, all have to participate in the peace, and all have to participate in the negotiations towards peace. And this is what the Security Council Resolution 1325 about women, peace and security is saying, and we are really trying to implement that. And it has been also over the last years very important. We were asked to facilitate the peace process in Colombia after the longest standing civil war we've seen, over 35 years. And when they decided to sit down at the table, we also helped them to create a particular women's group there to negotiate on the table.
Excellent. Thank you. And talking of people-to-people relations and creating that bond which sometimes can survive conflict and war, Diana, you are an exponent of cultural diplomacy. आप तो हिंदी इतनी अच्छी बोलते हैं और संस्कृत के स्टूडेंट हैं, तो बताइए इसकी इम्पोर्टेंस क्या है?
There is definitely big scope for cultural diplomacy, but I guess, again, it depends on the stage of a conflict and the war. I don't think when the fire is raging that soft diplomacy can do much. There has to
you
be
won't
some
hold
distance.
the Bolshoi ballet useful.
I think it's a distance that is needed, and in the end, what we are seeing, for example, in our region, and I totally sympathize with the trend because we are currently very, very close to the war, and we are hosting a huge number of Ukrainian refugees, where we hear those stories from them directly, not through BBC, CNN, or anyone else. is that, even Russian literature is no longer, it's not that you don't like it anymore, you just don't want it anymore because it's associated. Culture can get associated to something that you don't want to hear. And when the foreign minister Lavrov is quoting Pushkin's most imperial poem in today's, world, we take the message. It would be like, the foreign secretary of UK quoting Kipling and then saying, "We'll get you back." So it is like, it's a very...
So in the process, a perfectly fabulous poet like Pushkin suffers.
It does. Poor Pushkin, I think he would not be very happy about this, but then culture can be hijacked.
Do you
and
break
abused,
statues and stuff like
No.
that?
But I mean, it's to the point as I say, you don't want it. I mean, and you choose, there are so many other things. So maybe sometime later.
Yeah.
So I'm like, but, I've also seen, for example, with Azerbaijanis and Armenians who have been in a very long standoff for, decades or so. We have had, some performances where cultural groups from the two countries refuse to perform on the same stage, one after another, right?
Yeah.
And then when facilitation happens, they sit down and they realize that they're really so close.
Yeah.
And the way, cultural affinities are so, and it would be so good to get over this. So I do believe in culture and its role, but it is a very
Limited role.
It's a limited role in the fire
Yeah.
stage of the conflict.
Yeah. You wanted to come in, and then I want to go to India, Pakistan, and culture. But
Yes, please. May I come in here?
Yes.
Because we are, Norway, also a neighboring country to Russia. And we have been building up over the years very close people-to-people relations with Russia, and particularly in our northern regions. And then there is a limit to those people-to-people relationship as well. That came first in 2014 when Russia invaded Crimea, but then it has been absolute stop since the invasion of Ukraine since in 2022. We are not saying that we are not talking to Russians at all, but we have stopped a lot of those people-to-people relations also because it has been so difficult to manage, and the anger that is coming from Russia in this moment for us neighboring countries, it's impossible to manage, and then we just can't talk.
so Ajay, India, Pakistan, we play cricket. We were rivals at hockey, rivals at cricket. We love the same tangdi kebab. We listen to Mehndi Hasan, Ghulam Ali. They listen to Kishore Kumar and Lata Mangeshkar, Jappi Pappi, which you missed. But so what can't that solve our problems, or it has its limitations?
Well, it does. But before that, let me also endorse something what Diana said, that it's important to remember that sometimes there is justified anger and sometimes it's unjustified. So, we
Yes.
saw that conversation also in the US about the right war and the wrong war. Afghan war was the right one and Iraq the wrong war. And what May-Elin said about the flexibility facilitation, I think what India has gone to is a measure of a measured flexibility in its conversations with Pakistan in terms of talking to others. So, the Financial Action Task Force is an international body, and so is the International Court of Justice and other organizations where India is active. But coming back to your question, there is a strong cultural intimacy, and it kind of expresses itself in Pakistan after 6 p.m. After 2 whiskeys, we are really very, very close to each other. And
You were advised not to say certain things after 6
yes.
p.m.
So one guru of mine, who was Satinder Lamba, he gave me that one piece of advice, that after 6 p.m. in Pakistan, never discuss Kashmir, because you will never agree. And, the passion that comes out fueled by all that whiskey might be much more than we can handle in one evening. So I think that's always been true. But as Diana said, when there's a conflagration, that's not the best time to talk of cultural intimacy. Pakistan prefers to be treated, at least during the day, as a foreign country. And they encourage Indian diplomats to deal with Pakistan as a country that is overseas and a country that is self-respecting and so on. And that was the piece of advice Natwar Singh got before he went as ambassador in the 80s from his counterpart, saying never say we are the same people, because the otherization and the identity of Pakistan comes from being different.
A different country. Well, that's so fascinating. We could go on, but I have 5 minutes, and I do want to take at least 2 or 3 questions, and maybe we'll do it together. Since we've discussed India-Pakistan, I want to go back to the origins of this. We have the British High Commissioner there, and maybe he wants to say something.
Thank you very much. As the recipient of, and occasionally apparently the source of, or cause of anger in my current function, I wanted to ask you, when do you think that anger can work? When can it actually advance something? Or do you think it's always a blocker?
Okay, maybe we take one more. Yes, the gentleman at the back there, please.
Hi, my fascinating discussion. My question is to Ambassador Bisaria. You talked a lot about Pakistan, and obviously that was an urgent, more passionate incident. But what about Canada, which was your next immediate spat that you were in the midst of?
Right.
And just can you walk us through that? And is it more about now danger management that you're specializing in rather than anger management?
Okay. And so we'll take the third, and I think we'll stop with that, and then we'll give it to the panel.
Good morning, everyone. So my question is, as diplomat, how you deal with angry executives in your own country when you think that anger is counterproductive for the situation?
Right.
Okay, so let me take a quick stab at that. For the High Commissioner's question, anger, it is deployed as a tool both by politicians and policymakers and even, in fact, diplomats. We've been talking about justified and unjustified anger. So certainly justified anger needs to be expressed. So the question here is whether people on the ground should be genuinely, passionately angry or simply be pretending to be angry. And I think that is often the role of a diplomat, to pretend to be angry about something which is very morally or politically justified. On the question about Canada, I have a very serious suggestion to write a sequel to this book. And the good news is I don't have to change the title. I've been asked to write the same book and just tell that story.
So next year we'll discuss that.
Absolutely. And the question about what is happening domestically, I think what you're talking of speaks to how important is domestic public opinion to foreign policy. I think that is the fundamental issue. People are outraged and angry about, say, terrorism or some act that has happened within the country, or blasphemy. It expresses itself certainly in the diplomacy that we deploy, and particularly in functioning democracies. That is the function of good foreign policy, to take into account domestic opinion.
Would you like to come in?
I would like to take up on that the domestic opinion and answer that question, talking about Norwegian work on peace and reconciliation. We have always wondered in the Foreign Service, is this something that the people of Norway actually support? 2 years ago, 6 months after Taliban takeover of Kabul, we took the Taliban to Norway. And it was a massive media outcry. Why can you spend so much money taking the Taliban to Norway and putting them in a nice hotel at the outskirts of Oslo? And the media was really angry. But after that, we also asked people, what do you think? Is this something that we should do as Norway, and to use our soft power in that way? And the answer was yes. the people actually thought that this is something that we should do. And for us, it was really reassuring, because then we also had the reassurance of domestically for what we were doing.
So we have the title of your book, Taking the Taliban to Norway. Yeah. Yeah. Diana, last comments?
Yes, I definitely believe that anger can be used, the justified anger can be definitely used, to form pressure groups, to vent emotions, to rally for the cause. And even I definitely believe that any negotiations through mediators and facilitators are possible, because there are anger groups affecting them. And, sometimes parties need to take very difficult decisions. So only with a pressure group behind you, though it's a bit like good policeman and a bad policeman, that you can finally achieve a result. So definitely, anger needs to be managed, but it should be used also to...
Thank you, Excellencies. We are absolutely out of time. May I request you to give a hand to all of them?